Hello, I'm Professor Dr. Charles H. Cranford, and I want to talk to you this morning about new brain electronic units that I've developed for the process of your child, young adult, older adults, and those with behavior challenge problems. Alzheimer's, like my father had, loss of memory, help to gain the memory back after you had a stroke. These units can rewire the brain. This unit will increase the wiring of the brain for your child to have a genius ability. Now, I've been saying this for many years, and my first unit I developed over a year ago, and I only used it on the behavior challenged children. And then I started using it on the regular children and the young adults, because I had this young lady, 30 years old, that I used it on to help rewire her brain. And she kept telling me about she could focus better, she felt like a stronger brain. So I realized and started studying about this and redeveloped my unit to where it also can give your child the genius ability. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a short-lived ability. How long will it last? Well, I have people that told me after taking their exams, national exams, that it lasted several days. But you have to keep using it. It's not something that will be permanent. Now, the wiring of the brain for the children that have behavioral problems, that is permanent after they finish the wiring. Now, I want to talk to you about the brain development process. The brain develops in a predictable sequence, from the most basic functions to the most complex ones. The interaction of genetic inheritance, in other words, what you're born with, and environment determines how the brain will develop. Now, listen carefully to that. I just said you're born with, so genetic, that's genetic, and environment affect the way your brain develops. There are 5 basic processes that make up brain development. Many of these processes begin before birth, prenatal. They are not completed until later in your child advancement. Neurogenius is the process of forming neurons. This is the first process to occur in brain development and is completed before a baby is born. Neuromigration is the process of organizing the brain by moving neurons to specific areas based on the functioning these cells will perform. Migration begins prenatally but continues for at least 8 to 10 months after a baby is born. Okay, what this means is that our specific areas of the brain have cells that perform different functions, and the migration begins prenatally, that means before the baby is born, and 8 to 10 months after a baby is born. This is the strongest period that your child uses the synapses to make the brain connections. Myelination is the process of coating the axon of each neuron with a fatty coating called myelin. Now, I have found that all my behavioral children problems, if not inherited, have this myelin coating that does not finish. And it's the myelination that begins in the brainstem and the cerebellum before birth. And this is 90 over 90% of the children that I treat have this problem. Synapses genius is the process of forming networks of connections in the brain. Synapses begin forming prenatally, but the process continues throughout life. Now, this is kind of complicated, but basically stay with me just for a few more moments and you'll get the understanding. Pruning. Now, this is a really important process. Pruning is the process of weeding out unnecessary connections and strengthening the important ones. Based on a child's experience, some pruning begins very early in development, but the most rapid pruning happens about the age of 3 and to 16 years old. Different areas of the brain undergo pruning during different sensitive periods. Now, pruning is where the brain cuts away different, like you could think of as a tree, different limbs of that tree. Now, the pruning, if your child has a problem, a behavior challenge problem, ADD, ADHD, and autism, this pruning will do away with a lot of those inactive brain synapses. Okay, so your child is now going through, if they're under 16 years old, they're going through a pruning stage. In any activity that is not used, any cells that are not being used will be pruned away. Now, some of this is good because we have an abundance of cells, but some of it is bad if the pruning is in an area that you really need to strengthen that synapses of those cells rather than prune it away. Pruning is a process that is more important than we once believed. Experience during infancy, childhood form the connections that shape the development of the brain. Pruning is a key part of brain development because it eliminates the connections that are not used. Often enough, pruning provides room for the most important networks of connections to grow and expand, making the brain more efficient. Also, pruning is really abundant. It's very, very important in behavior challenged children. And why is this so? Well, in our children that have ADD, ADHD, and autism problems, our adults that have Alzheimer's, the pruning is done on some areas that we really don't need to be pruned. We need it to be strengthened. So a person that has these problems should have treatment that can stop this pruning, because some of the areas that it prunes away we need to keep the brain active. It eliminates the connections, we're talking about pruning now, that are not used often enough. Well, this is okay in young children, but in young children that have problems, it's not okay because the pruning takes away from any cell that is not active or any synapses that is not active, and we don't want that because we want to strengthen certain areas. So we need to be careful that the pruning does not harm our child rather than help. There are 8 steps that must be completed before your child can have a superior brain. If any of these steps are not completed, then your child will not have a normal brain, let alone a superior brain. Possibly even have the brain wiring behavior challenged children